Welcome to the Coptimizer Podcast, a platform dedicated to uncuffing your true potential in public safety. We're here to provide you with valuable tips and insights that will help you optimize your life and career. I'm retired Chief Patrick Flanley, and I'm honored to be your guide and coach on this journey. Here, I'll share the latest insights and strategies to help you survive and thrive in the demanding world of public safety. Our noble duty is to protect and serve. We embody the role of peacemakers in our communities. However, this profession's immense physical and mental demands come with a price. If we fail to take a proactive approach for our well-being and lead ourselves first, then the stress from the job can and will lead to poor health outcomes. We have all seen it play out. Not only does this impact our professional and personal lives, but it also affects our ability to fulfill this sacred duty. Like many of you, my journey has been filled with tremendous challenges, with highs and lows. However, through creativity, experience, and a positive attitude, I successfully managed over 30 years in law enforcement, emerging healthy and happy. Now, I am driven to share what I've learned to show you that the path is not all doom and gloom. There is hope and a profound purpose in serving your community, and I'm here to show you that it does not have to come at the cost of your health and well-being. Join us as we explore cutting-edge research, interview top experts, and share inspiring stories of transformation. Whether on duty or off, it's time to optimize your potential and live your best life. Get ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered. This is the Coptimizer Podcast. Greetings all, welcome back to another episode of the Coptimizer Podcast. I'm excited. I've got another awesome guest. They keep rolling in. Very fortunate. Ron Camacho, Dr. Ron Camacho, Chief Ron Camacho. We have some different titles that we could I guess that we could introduce you with, but you're the current chief for North Charleston, South Carolina PD, but that's not where you came from. So we're going to get into a little bit of that. And you got what I think it's over 3 decades of experience in policing. And we got introduced by a mutual friend, Daniel Folk, who we I think both have had some association with on the coaching side of policing. And that'll be fun to dive into today, but I'll be quiet and let you introduce yourself. And really want to thank you for being here and spending some of your valuable time with us.
Thank you, Pat. Yeah, it's an honor to be on your show. Yeah, 30 years in the biz. Did most of my policing in Pennsylvania. 18 years with York City, York, Pennsylvania, which I know we talked earlier, you have family up in the Hershey area.
Yep.
Retired early, bought some military time, got my pension, went over to Afghanistan as a police advisor. Then I spent a year in Mexico running a State Department training program where I had 30 to 35 officers and federal agents retired from all over the place, working for me, training Mexican police officers at the local, state, and federal level. Hardest job I ever had. Don't take a job where you have to supervise retired cops in a foreign. It's a challenge, especially Mexico when you're in Mexico City with all the temptations of Mexico City. So learned a lot in that position. I had some great bosses there. A classmate from the National Academy was my immediate supervisor, a guy called Alan John, and a guy called Jack Stradley, who was a co-owner of the company called Crucible. And those guys taught me a lot of corporate stuff, really put my mind, I'm just a regular cop, and they just took all that MBA stuff and shoved it into my head and really got me thinking about, the corporate way of thinking. And I pulled a lot of that into my leadership and management style with further research and further knowledge and reading on the corporate way of doing things. Left there, the contract ended, went to Old Dominion as a lieutenant, stood there for about a year. And during those times when I knew that the contract was ending in Mexico, and then during my time there at Old Dominion, I was testing for chief's jobs. I knew I wanted to come back. I knew I wanted to be a chief, and got hired in 2016 as the chief of Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. Not many people know Chambersburg, north of Hagerstown, Maryland, and 35 minutes west of Gettysburg, So right there, smack dab in the middle there. Small department, like 40 total employees of the department. But Chambersburg is known because the town itself, the borough itself, owns its own water, electricity, and gas. So it's a very affluent place. They have money. And there, I started my chief's journey there. Got my master's there, wound up getting my doctorate there, and really started using a whole bunch of the things that I've learned along the way to transform the department into one of the best departments in South Central Pennsylvania. So, yeah, that's my journey.
Well, that's interesting because there's always been these arguments, who makes the best cops, right? Is it military veterans? Is it college graduates? Is it neither? And, I've always kind of had as a veteran myself and as a college graduate, my belief was always like it could be any of the above, all of the above, or none of the above, right? It's really highly individualistic. What I think the difference is a person that is willing to commit to being a lifelong learner, because I think with curiosity comes resilience and adaptability. I'm just kind of curious, like what as you went back to school, do you think like your education changed your perspective at all on education and how it impacts policing?
100%. Well, what I didn't talk about was I am a vet also. So I did spent 8 years in the Army. My last three, I was a paratrooper at the 82nd Airborne Division, which I call a leadership school. So I was there, infantry squad leader, and I learned some incredible leadership traits there. You didn't take care of your troops, you were going to get hammered, and you better accomplish the mission to the best of your ability. And my time there was super important. And I got there right after these guys came back from the Gulf War. So imagine somebody changing their MOS, right? I was an air defender, I was a sergeant, and I changed my MOS, I go airborne, and I get put into this unit of combat vets. So I'm a cherry, they call a new paratrooper. I'm new to the infantry as a sergeant, and I'm put with these combat vets. So it was very challenging, but it made my way there, and myself and my platoon mates, the guys that I was there for 2.5 years, we're still very tight. We still have reunions, and it just shows how special we were. That unit was very special, and many of those guys are very successful to this day. Not a lot of losers out of that platoon. So, but going back to answer your question, when I went to the National Academy, I didn't have a degree, right? And my roommate from Clay County, a lieutenant from Clay County, Florida, Ken Wagner, he taught me how to write papers. And I was embarrassed. And he used patience and empathy. And this guy taught me how to write papers because I had not done anything like that. I've been to multiple police schools and leadership schools, but I had not written a paper. And he took his time, and he didn't make me feel like an ass. And he taught me how to write a paper, which you needed to do at the National Academy. And when I was there, I realized, hey, I was young. I was a young captain. I was barely 40, 41 when I went to the National Academy. I'm a young captain already, and that showed me, hey, you better start getting professional, because I saw all the other people that were there. Most of them had bachelors. Most of them at that level had masters. There were a couple of lawyers. There were a couple of doctors, and that really woke me up. Like, if I want to compete for a chief's position, this is the competition. And then when I got back home, immediately I took those 16 or 17 credits that you get from the National Academy, and I started my education. And I went again to get my master's, to be more professional, and to get better, become a better person. Like you said, don't stop learning. And I can't stand when I'm around people that were chiefs or deputy chiefs or anybody that's in a leadership position where they stop learning. And you know that, like, they're stuck in whatever year that they decided to say, hey, that was the best year of my life, so I'm going to stop and I'm not going to progress. And I'm fighting that in my organization now, and pushing that and showing them, hey, development means learning little bits, going into different areas, being well rounded, and being comfortable with the uncomfortable. I praise that all the time. We're not Navy SEALs here, but you have to mentally, you have to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. And that means, I have a guy, street cop, excellent street sergeant, put him in recruiting. Let's start getting you, you know, some of this admin, stuff that you need. Let's start opening up your mind. As a matter of fact, he's working with performance protocol and Daniel, and his mind is opening up to that world. So yes, for me, getting the doctorate in my old organization, I felt I needed to do that for two reasons. Number one, um, to lead by example, because I wanted them to push. I wanted more people to get their masters. But number two, eventually I knew that I wanted to compete for, a larger agency. And I felt like the doctorate could help open those doors. I knew, coming from a small agency, a lot of times my resume and all the crazy things that I'd done, which I'm very proud of, um, it didn't matter, right? What mattered was your experience in a larger agency. So I
Yeah,
felt like the doctorate could open up the door, and it definitely did help here, and it did open the door. But everything else was me and what I've done, and showing the panel and the people that picked me, especially the mayor, hey, this is what I've done, and this is what I can do for you and the police department here in North Charleston.
yeah. I mean, I think that's great. I think that's great wisdom for anyone that is considering like that type of journey and that path. With those, change in position also comes a change in responsibility and a much higher level of accountability and scrutiny. So the education is, that's it's like a free path, and it's a free gateway to knowledge and information. Well, maybe not free, but I guess depending on where you go, but it's an opportunity that's available to anyone, and it can be formal, it can be informal. There's a lot of different ways to learn, but a couple things to touch on. I've had this conversation oftentimes over the years, um, not just about like the Navy SEALs, but just the military in general, right? Like the military figured this out a long time ago that they educate leaders long before they ever put you in the role. Like you're required to go through like NCO prep school, like non-commissioned officers. Like you have to go through the preparatory school in order to become a candidate to be available, able to be promoted. And in policing, historically, it's never been like that. And to this day, I mean, most organizations don't. I have a lot of beliefs as to why that is. Primarily, I think the biggest roadblock is just investment. It's just having the resources, being able to do it. People don't, I think, realize the scarcity in police resources. But if you're going to send people through training and educational programs like that, like they're coming off the street, which means like there's one less person available to run and answer calls for service. Um, which kind of brings me to the whether it's a Navy SEAL or a special operations perspective, the in the post George Floyd days, there was a lot of commentary from people in the special operations community, some, very well-known speakers and stuff like that, very well-intentioned, great, just great leaders that were saying, every police officer should be a blue belt in jujitsu. Everyone should have, there should be a college requirement. The amount of training hours should be there, which yeah, I don't think you're ever going to find a chief that's going to disagree with all that, but just the structural, the organizational structure is just different. And so, in special forces, you already have a group of people that have self-selected into the military, and now they're self-selecting into a highly specialized unit. And then once they get there, if they make it through the crucible to get into that, that's just the beginning. They're going to spend 2 years in a training pipeline learning everything there is about what they need to do in their job before they ever go deploy for the first time. And then when they go do deploy, they're going to do that as in a very apprentice role, right? Whether you're a cherry or something else, right? You're going to be at the bottom rung, you're going to deploy, and then you're going to for maybe what they on 4 to 6 month cycles, and then they come back, and then they have downtime where they like rest and recovery, and then they go into a training cycle. Then they get to look at all, hey, what do we deploy? What do we do well? What do we need to work on? What do we learn from this deployment? How do we get ready for the next one? And then they deploy again. Where cops like that's just not even. You're lucky if you get 600 hours of training in your first year, and that's going to vary state to state. So, um, yeah, I mean, there's this huge gap. Like, there's just these big differences. And I've said this time and time again. If you give me the DoD's budget, uh, policing in America, I mean, which is already pretty damn good, would be amazing. Just give me that budget. I'll suit back up today if you're going to give me that budget. And I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. As far as some of that is not realistic budgetarily, right? I
Right.
think in order to do what they're saying, hey, a third of your people should be training, a third of your people should be on the street, and then a third of your people would be on, off or
Yeah,
vacation
like
or
in a
whatever that
recovery
might be.
mode, right?
Right, recovery mode. Our departments would grow by a third, basically, right? You know, um, and that when you start looking at budgets and how we get paid and where the money comes to pay for police and taxes, it's just not feasible, unless the government were to come and say, hey, we're going to, pay for that. Now, there are other ways that, cultures of different departments, sometimes there are grants to kind of, help with some of those things, or different departments invest in different things to try to mitigate that, as much as possible. But to do what they're saying, um, is not realistic. But we understand, the progressive chiefs get that, and we understand, that more training. We want a hell of a lot more training. We want the best equipment. We want the best people that we can get, and we're pushing for that to the best of our ability. And then again, we're doing everything we can to hold them accountable. So it is incredibly tough to balance all that stuff out. And when you come upon a department that's very well trained, you'll see that, as opposed to departments that aren't well trained, or a department that has a very good attitude, and they really have, the community at their heart, right? You can see that, as
Yep.
opposed to, other ones that it's just a job and they're just going in there, like robots. So, and that's up to, the command, that's up to the guy up top, right? That's up to that chief to push out that culture and make sure that that's reflecting what the community wants. Some communities, they want that. Hey, I don't care if you give me a ticket, I want everybody to get a ticket, right? Other communities, that's not what they want, right? They don't care about the drug dealer. They care about the music that's loud over here. They care about their life. Hey, I know Pookie's over there, selling drugs. I don't care about that. I care about this loud music next door. So, and when you come into those positions, you better know that community, and that can change from neighborhood to neighborhood. So that's why community policing is so important, to understand the different sections of your community and make sure that you're policing them the way they want to be policed. If not, if you're just blanket, just throwing a blanket, the same thing over the whole, jurisdiction, good luck, because you're going to run into tremendous problems doing that. So,
Well, yeah, that's interesting you brought up, and I failed to mention this earlier, but we do have a little bit of a connection in a couple different ways. One is like I'm originally from I was born just outside of Philadelphia, there in Westchester. My parents are from Scranton, and my one of my uncles was a longtime tenured state police officer, state trooper in Pennsylvania, based out of the Hershey barracks, and so two of my cousins were police officers there. So I have a ton of family there. But my first job right out of high school was the military. I went into the Air Force, and my for just about 3 years I was stationed in North Charleston, South Carolina, right there at Charleston Air Force Base. So you're in my old stomping grounds, which it's still one of my favorite places. I love the Charleston area. My wife and I, like, we've come back down there many times to vacation, and brought my children back down there. My whole family, we went down for uh, down to the Low Country for reunions and stuff like that. So thinking back a little bit, like your time in uh, Chambersburg, where you're from a very affluent community, and then smaller department. Then you're now in North Charleston. And every community has its ups and downs. I think Charleston, I think, has really been on the rise, and things are a little bit like every year. It's when you travel back to a place where you've lived before, you can always kind of see things that are changing and evolving. So it gives you some interesting perspective. But I mean, what is it? You know, from your perspective, like these experiences and the wisdom that you grab along the way, that you've taken with you. So I don't know, what are a few things like that you would share from a personal or professional perspective about like what that journey's been like and like the differences?
yeah. So, part about me and what happened in my first department, York, right? So I promoted up very quickly, and my leadership style there, and I say this all the time, was between, especially when I get to the lieutenant rank, I was put in charge of the detective division, a lot of stress on me, and I was told to fix it, right? And these were people that I was working with, um, just 5 years before, right? Um, so how does a young guy with about 11 years on the job effectively lead and manage, multiple people that have 25, 30 years on the job? How do I gain that respect? How do I accomplish the mission of getting people that, some of them, they were kind of burnt out or just not doing what they were supposed to be doing. The job had stopped being fun, or they were just, just punching it in. And uh, you know, I did it with an attitude of Patton and Genghis Khan combined, right? Which was not the smart thing to do, but that was my default at that point in time.
Well, it
You
doesn't
know,
surprise me coming from a paratrooper, right?
well, yeah, the Genghis Khan came probably from my love of history. So I came in there angry and, hard, very hard, and did not have any qualms of pulling guys that have been in positions for many years, moving them. I forced people to retire. I just really, it was about the mission and not so much the men and their, the many years that these guys, were doing the jobs. And I was successful, right? So I thought, okay, well, I'm successful, right? We're seeing some great success here. Crime is going down. My seizures in the drug unit is going up. So this is the way I should go. And I moved that when I became a captain, and that attitude stayed with me. And it was the wrong attitude to have, and it cost me a marriage. Wound up in therapy, and all of a sudden in therapy, I found out where that anger was coming from. That anger that had been stuffed for a long time, that stress and this added, tremendous amount of responsibility that was put on my shoulder. I was a SWAT guy at the time too, a SWAT commander. So add that, to my shoulders, and York was at that time, was a very busy and violent place, So go to therapy, and, originally went there for marriage counseling. Counselors like, we can't work on your marriage. I got to work on you. You got some demons we got to work on. And I start working on some trauma from childhood, some father issues, and really after 6 months of this intensive, therapy, it changed my life. It changed who I was. That anger was going away. I healed that stuff, and it didn't save the marriage, right? I don't know if anything could have, but it didn't save the marriage, but it saved me and my life and who I was, because I was headed to either swallowing a gun, putting my hands on somebody, a fellow officer or somebody on the street, where I would have gotten into some big trouble for that, or stroking out, having a heart attack or something like that. I mean, I was in a perpetual state of burn, every day. It was like a joke. One of my best friends came to visit here this year, and he was talking about, hey, do you have you have soundproofing material around your office now, because I used to yell so much back then. And my major came out and said, I think I've seen the chief mad one time in the year that I've known him, so it just total change of attitude. And a lot of it had to do with healing that trauma, getting my ego under control, and just moving. So that started my journey and learning about self-awareness, introspection, and controlling my ego, which that started in 2013. And then I really done a lot of research and working on that all the way through to my time in Chambersburg, which is kind of like an experiment. So during my time there, I met a council member, a recovering alcoholic. And he told me, hey, when you're a recovering alcoholic, you can spot another alcoholic. You can just spot them, right? You see the behavior, the stuff. Well, a recovering egomaniac can spot somebody with an ego problem. And when I was running into disciplinary issues or resistance with either sergeants or officers, it was always coming back to ego. And I started doing something that was unique. I started sending people to the psych doc. I said, either we want to go discipline, or do you want to go see the doc? It's up to you. And they chose the doc. And we started seeing some successes with that. We started seeing people, realize like, oh, this is me. I got to work on this, And some of that took hold forever. Some of that we had temporary patches on it, but at least we started having the conversation, and at least we started seeing some change. And from there, that got into my mindset, and we would have the talk about ego, and I brought that whole philosophy with me here, and it's every year it's changing, because there were some things I did in Chambersburg that, I made some mistakes on. I think I was too Buddhist, there. I turned from Genghis Khan to Buddha. You know, I was too. There were some issues there that I could have been a little stronger on, but I went just totally like, hey, I'm counting the number of times that I'm angry, and prided myself on like one time a year or two times a year. And this is a guy that was angry every day. But there were times where, I could have been a little stronger on some things. So when I got here, it's the same thing, right? Very quickly, I'm in a 400-person organization, 320 officers, authorized officers. And right away, my first week, discipline is coming to the staff meetings, and I'm recognizing people that have trauma that has not been touched. Nobody's been going to docs, and they don't have a doc here. They have to use EAP, but nobody is addressing that section, or stuff is just being ignored, or just you know just not really dealt with in a proper manner. So I started again because I've seen the same things. And don't get me wrong, we were I didn't have a lot of that at Chambersburg. They got that philosophy very quick, so we didn't have many problems there. Many of those people that were sent to the psych doc were the older, sergeants, or older officers there that were kind of resistant. Most of the younger guys kind of got on there. They were disciplined and got on with it. Here, it's all ranks that I'm dealing with that. But what I'm doing is we're having these conversations and able to talk about this, and I find it easier if we talk about ego, that we can address it instead of later on letting it hit you in the head, in the back of the head by mistake, or not by mistake, by surprise, and then we're having the conversation. So one thing I did last summer is I took the whole summer and I taught an ego class, kind of like what you did for those new chiefs, right? I
Right.
did
For wellness, yeah.
Yep, I did for my officers, 220 of them, corporal and below, detectives and below. I taught them Ego Kills Career, a class that I developed, and just what ego is, how to spot it, the use of empathy, how to develop self-awareness, what introspection is, and just different techniques to use to kind of get on top of ego and develop ego. And not only did I get to interact with all of my officers, which was cool because I was still relatively new. I was 8 months in when I did those classes. They got to see that I cared about them, which I genuinely do care about these guys. I want to see everybody succeed. But we had these talks, and we started seeing that, hey, they started looking in the mirror a little more. And I did the same thing, tweaked it a little bit for my sergeants and above. I taught them introspection, self-awareness, so that they could start spotting things with them, and then within themselves, and then see the things amongst their officers. So with that, we started having these conversations, which helped tremendously as we moved forward and started changing the culture here.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you have a policy in your new agency now where officers are required to see a culturally competent uh, therapist, or whatever it might be, psychologist, every year, or is that something that's optional?
So I just got that in my budget. So we didn't have that. And one of the things that I did
Back to the budget again. Got to have the
was,
money, right?
yeah, one of the things that I did for our budget goes to July. So starting July 1st, everybody in the whole agency will go meet with, you know, um, a counselor, a police counselor, a therapist, once a year to get that mental health checkup, you know. So, and I think that's super important for them. And, met with her, had multiple conversations. She was a Charleston cop who, decided to go into this realm. She gets it, and we talked about what this looks like. Again, I don't hear what they talk about. All I know is that they went, and that's all I care about. Just making sure that you're getting the opportunity to talk to somebody to make sure that you're good to go.
Yeah,
That
and I do think it's commendable that your willingness and your openness to share your own story, I think lends, credibility to the process that you're not going to ask your officers to do something that you haven't or wouldn't do or don't do yourself. And I think, one of the benefits to, you know, getting the resources to be able to provide that type of mandatory evaluation is that you don't have to worry about the stigma because that gets dropped because it's not people getting selected to do it. It's everybody has to do it. And it's like, hey, you want to go in there and talk about baseball for an hour, go talk about baseball, but you're going to spend an hour or whatever it might be, whatever your contract says. So I mean, for chiefs or other, emerging leaders that might be listening, that's that is it's a trend that I think started probably, 5 years or so ago that's really gained a lot of traction and makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like, I, uh, you know, a lot of the wellness work that I do is really, more metabolic health related nowadays. I can't, most people don't realize that even though every police officer has to pass a physical fitness test to become a certified officer, regardless of state, less than 2% of police departments in America have job qualifying physical fitness standards. So most people outside of policing just assume like, well, cops have to take a fitness test.
right.
And well, they really don't. But it's like, well, maybe they should, just in the same way that they should have to go see a counselor because, cops see a lot of nasty stuff. I mean, the worst that society can throw at a person, yeah, that's what cops are dealing with. And it's not just every once in a while, it's every day. Yeah, I mean, it's every day, all day.
Yeah, 100%. And especially here, we're a very busy department. Not It's not the same place that it was when you were here. So we've gotten a lot better since your days here in North
It
Charleston.
was busy back then.
Yeah,
I
well,
those, we got to know some of those guys, and I took some night classes. It was Trident Technical College back then. I don't know if it's still around or not, but
yeah, it is. So um, it is, and we have a training center there that's state of the art. So we had a really bad shooting here, and the Walter Scott shooting,
oh
and
yeah.
because of that, um, this department really took its training serious, and that their partnership with the college and what we do over there is just indicative of how serious the department's attitude was to change, you know, and evolve. And that was already happening when I got here, and I just hopped on and just am making sure that we're continuing that and bringing whatever other additional ideas I have. But we take training very serious here, and we put a lot of money into our training to make sure that something as tragic as that never happens again. So,
Yeah, and that one, that was a one of those like 10 or so cases that just kind of like it was back to back and put a lot of scrutiny on policing. And it's, as a chief, I've had a couple of those cases that have gone viral that that were, where it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter if you're in an agency of 5 officers or 5,000 officers. In the age of the body camera, um, nothing, nothing is, escapes anymore. It's everything's due public scrutiny, and I mean, and I think that's a good thing. But it does highlight, I think, oftentimes what, I call it the fundamental attribution error when it comes to sometimes we blame officers for poor performance when the officers themselves are just products of the environment in which they're hired, equipped, trained, and resourced. And then when you have a bad outcome, it's easy to blame the officer and replace them or fire them or do whatever with the assumption that there's just another one waiting to come take their place. And 20 years ago that was the case. But
Yeah.
nowadays there's a lot of agencies that sometimes have more openings than they do applicants. And
Right.
that is a huge challenge. And so it really kind of forces you to take a different perspective on, well, if I'm spending all this time and effort to identify who the best candidates are, why do we keep having some of these issues where they're getting into some of these problems? And I think, my question that's coming is will tie into a little bit about, what you experienced yourself is that when you're screening applicants, we don't, oftentimes I've said this, like we don't hire bad officers. We hire good people and put them into a very difficult job that, if you're going to create a bad person, I mean, it's almost like the perfect recipe for it because you expose them to trauma and misery all day. And then, in one way to say this is like you can ask someone to swim in the sewers all day, but you can't expect them to pop out and smell like roses.
Right.
Like, you got to take a shower first. You got to clean off. And sometimes, that analogy I think is sometimes effective in getting people to understand, like you put good people in there and you're asking a lot of a human being. And that's
Yeah.
a tough thing to do.
So one thing that I found here, there was a culture of kind of, very loosey goosey with discipline, self-discipline and discipline overall, and also kind of a culture of sweeping stuff under the rug, which was very foreign to me and unacceptable to me. That's not, the way I came up in policing. That was unacceptable. That's not who I am. And in any of my organizations, even my first one, which wasn't perfect, we just did not do that. So on one case, I had this problematic, older, salty um, corporal who, I pulled off the street like within the first couple of weeks I was here, sent him to go get some help, EAP, came back, you know, fitness for duty, said he was good to go, moved him to another section of the city, and, you know, thought, we're good to go. What I didn't realize was that behavior was continuing, and the sergeant, with that loosey, laissez faire, hands off type attitude, and a lieutenant, sort of the same way, um, let this guy's behavior continue. The troops saw it, and you know, um, they were disgusted by it, but that got stifled. And this guy did one thing, and then he did another thing. This is all on body cam that was caught and reviewed, and they minimized this. And then he did something that was caught from people using their cameras, right, their phones, that became viral, and he was totally wrong, and we were held in a bad light. So I took immediate action, and then found out later on that that could have been avoided had they addressed these two incidents, these two warnings of him and his attitude. There were clear signs that this guy was going, and that he was acting way more aggressive and just way more unprofessional than he should have at both of these incidents. So, I pulled them in, and I addressed that with them. And eventually I showed those body cams to the sergeants and above and said, hey, never again. This ain't gonna happen. And that was one of the few times that I was angry since being here, because I was appalled that we would do something like that, because this was avoidable, right? The warning signs were there, you know. And then
Well, that's
later
what
on,
Gordon
yeah,
Graham would say, right? If it's
yeah,
predictable, it's preventable.
right. And then later on, I did the same with all the troops. I pulled in all the troops and showed them these videos to say, hey, this is unacceptable. This won't happen again. And it really woke up the whole department. You know, uh, pulled people off the street. Some people had to retire. You know, and got the message across. And empowered those sergeants. A long time ago, I thought that the sergeant position was the most important position, in policing in our rank structure. After working for, well, I believe now that the chief is the most important position because we have the power to set, we can make your life miserable. We can make your life really good, right? With
Right.
culture, and our attitude. But the sergeant position is still incredibly important. And I slowly but surely started empowering those sergeants and giving them the power that maybe they felt they had lacked. I think they felt over time that their authority had been removed from them. And I kind of pushed down, hey, you're the sergeants, you're empowered. You're not going to kick your authority up. These are your people, take charge. And we've seen some changes. We've seen some positive changes on that, and I have some good stats to say, hey, that's working. So
Yeah, that's exciting to hear. And that's like, accountability is that comes with the authority and the responsibility. I mean, that's like you can't pass accountability on. Like you have to accept it at every level of the organization. And yeah, that kind of goes back to, the point I was making earlier. And, one of the things where young supervisors, I think, historically have struggled in policing is because we don't train them how to be supervisors and we don't train them for the role before they get in it. And this is still true in many police departments today, if not a majority, that you get promoted because you're technically and tactically proficient. You're good at your job. But being a good patrol officer doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a good sergeant because you have to manage and lead other people. And you would say like as an officer, you're 100% operational. As a sergeant, you're about 30%, or 30% administrative and 70% operational. And that kind of flips, depending on your role in the organization, but a shift lieutenant is really, they're more 20% operational and about 70 to 80% administrative. So if you don't train them on what those roles are and what it means, then oftentimes you get frustration because people have an idea about what they want their sergeant to be, and then they become a sergeant and they realize, well, this isn't what I expected. And I thought just because I was here and people liked me and I was good at my job that they would just do what I'd say and, this would all be great. And then you realize, well, that's just not how it works. Um, I don't know, maybe the lesson there is like with like resources like you have, like those connections with the local community college and in universities that we can begin to build these educational and leadership pipelines and management as well, where you're being taught these roles. And so you clearly understand it before you actually step foot in it. Because that's another part of it too, of like if you get a mismatch in your role, then that can create some identity issues. Like, hey, this is what I
yeah,
thought the job was going to be. And if you're not having fun or enjoying your job or, feel like it's uh, something that you're going to be passionate about, then it's hard to show up and work hard every day in that role. So yeah,
yeah.
something I think we can improve on.
I hated the guys that just wanted to get promoted just for the extra pay or the shiny things on their collars or their sleeves. And they're you can just see those. Yeah, they're transparent.
Yeah.
You can just see them. Like, I know why you did that. That's not, uh, that's going to come through to your troops. That's going to come through to us. As we're looking for those dedicated individuals to move on up through the organization. It's just going to come through. So, if you really want to do the job well, be be aware of what you're taking on. Understand that you're going to be the father, the mother, the priest, the therapist, you know, um, everything to those troops. And you should welcome that, and you should be honored to have that position, especially at that sergeant rank, because it's so important, for you to be in that position. It's an honor. And if you don't respect that, then, you're not going to be successful.
Yeah, and to go back kind of the point you were making earlier too, is like accountability. It just has to be there, and a lot of times, if people don't have that right base, or they haven't had the right training or the right mentorship from other leaders, then sometimes they feel like they're doing an officer a favor by not holding them accountable to some of these, what might be considered like a minor infraction. But that's really where the difference gets made. That's where accountability is set in all of the little things.
Yeah.
And learning how to have those hard conversations early is it's so important. And and that's a tougher thing for, I think, maybe you notice this, like, in a smaller organization compared to a larger organization. Like, you don't have as many personal ties and relationships to your coworkers. In some of these smaller departments, I mean, one day you've been coworkers for 10 to 15 years, and the next day you're the boss, like you're the supervisor. And so having to manage that relationship, can create some challenges, in the workplace.
Yeah. Here, the challenge is making sure that my message, what the direction, is properly spread out, unfiltered, and just taught in the right way, so that that can get um, spread throughout the organization equally, and in the best possible way, so that we're all on the same sheet of music. We all understand what we need to do. I I take a book out of marketing. You walk into this building, there's signs all over the place, that kind of tell you, hey, this is what you're supposed to do. My expectations are all over the place. If you want to know how to be successful in this organization, read those expectations, and uh, you will not be wrong. Let's put it that way. And well, one of the things that I had to do here in order to show about, hey, everybody's accountable, had to demote some people, and that woke up some people to say, whoa, this guy is serious. I didn't feel good about that. Nobody feels good about that, but it was the message needed to be sent that we we need to be we need to change this attitude, and this is a serious job. We're in a serious city. We owe it to our civilians, our citizens, to be serious about this profession. And, this is what's going to happen if you don't take this job serious. And again, that kind of opened up some people. And I did not get the resistance that you might think somebody would get. I got, hey, we're following this guy because we think he's fair, he's equal, and I think he's objective, and he has our best. Um, he wants what's best for us and the organization. I've done enough crazy stuff in my career. I don't need any more plaques or accolades. It's not about me. When my people succeed, that's a home run for me. That's a touchdown for me. And that's all I care about at this point in my career. So.
Well, Jocko says it in Extreme Ownership, which is a fantastic book, but the quote doesn't originate with him, but I think he just says it in a very profound way, right? Is you get what you tolerate,
Yeah,
and that's just it's at any level of the organization. If
100%. And now a lot of people are more empowered and taking their positions serious, and it's nice to see. And again, we're seeing some big differences here, and I'm very happy with that.
Well, we've already covered, just kind of organically some of the things I wanted to talk about, but you have a book coming out, and I don't know how much you want to reveal about your book, but I would love to just, maybe touch on a few things about that, and promote it a little bit in advance because I think these topics are very germane in when you think about like uh, just specifically at a time when chiefs are busy enough running, police departments, and you in specific, I mean, what was it that, was that motivator for you that said, you know what, I've accumulated all this knowledge and its wisdom. It's time to share back. Whether it's, is it going to be for new officers, sergeants, these middle management, inside the organization, chiefs,
Yeah.
the community
So
members that have to support the police?
yeah. So like I said, I've been doing this work with ego since 2013, right? Studying stuff. I'm a huge fan of Jocko. Ryan Holiday is another guy who's written Ego is the Enemy and written book on Stoicism. So all those guys that and the Stoic philosophy, I've read their stuff. I've listened to their podcast, and I've really dove into that and just did a lot of research and study on that. And then I'm in the job, right? I'm a chief of a department. I'm dealing with um, politicians. I'm dealing with council members. I'm dealing with my officers. I'm dealing with irate citizens, and whether that's in Chambersburg or here or in my other positions, and I'm quickly formulating, not quickly, but over all those years that you know there's one common denominator to resistance, right? Resistance to getting stuff done, resistance to following rules, resistance to training, and then conflict between people. And usually to me that has to do with ego, right? So I did all this work on myself and started seeing, you know, when people started doing work on themselves, how we started seeing success. I got here, right? I've developed these classes. I've written articles on the subject, and then I get here. I teach that class during the summer, right? And I just saw, I just got these positive vibes from people. I have an empathy exercise, right? I do an empathy exercise where I go and I tell them, hey, give me a time when somebody did not use empathy during your career and how that made you feel. And here I have some tough lieutenants and sergeants crying in this class, crying in a room full of their peers because somebody's lack of empathy hit them so hard during their careers, you know? So that was very impactful to me. Like, hey, there's something here, right? There's something here. So, and many of the things that I was doing in that class, wasn't death by PowerPoint. It was a lot of exercises. Let's do stuff to try to build up your self awareness, so you can see who the hell you are, accurately. Um, let's talk about introspection. Let me tell you how I use introspection, and let me show you what that looks like, and tell you how important it is for you to put that in your toolbox. And then you're on LinkedIn a lot, I'm on LinkedIn a lot, right? And then I get hit with a guy saying, hey, have you ever thought about writing a book? I said, yes, I have, right? So it was a company called Manuscripts, and they kind of help you. You got to pay, right? But they helped me, set me up with different coaches, and it was the best amount of money that I could spend. It was a great amount. I don't want to tell you how much I spent, but it was worth it. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
mean, it's the great journey of like because I think writing and again, like just being in the process, I'm not finished, but it's more about like the self-discovery that comes along the way. I mean, it just forces introspection, it forces um, perspective.
yeah.
Um,
And we're both, we both, Daniel coaches and stuff like that. So now I had coaches, right? I had
yeah,
coaches telling me, hey, this is what you need to do in order to formulate your ideas and put this into chapters. I probably could not have done that by myself. And if I would have done that by myself, it would look very different and probably would not have flowed as nice. Then I got another coach, right, who's like, hey, a Russian guy, Ilya, love him. He was like, every week you're writing a chapter. I'm like, what? You're writing a chapter. And I was, I didn't have a life. And, really, I don't have any hobbies, man. It's me, my wife, the dogs, my kids are grown, and it's us. And the book became my hobby. I got home, knocking stuff out, weekends, go up into the den and just hammering away. And he was a coach. He was pushing me. You know how coaching is about accountability. And that guy was, hey, I want 3,000 words. I go and hit it just right. And that was a great. And then his critiques were awesome, because you don't know what you don't know. So you're going into this unknown. I never written a book before, written plenty of articles, but never a book. So knocking out that. And then their opinion, the company's opinion is, you're not going to get rich writing a book. You want to become an expert on this subject. You want somebody that they'll pay you to talk about this. So they set you up to do a campaign so that you can get your name out there. So I had to raise $15,000, right? Which was the most painful thing in the world. I'd much rather have, my appendix and spleen taken out at the same time without anesthesia. Because Pat, you and I were givers, right? We give advice, we give help. That's what I do. I help people. Now I'm asking people for help. And it was difficult. I was uncomfortable again, right? But I learned some stuff, and I was happy. I had a coach for that who helped me, develop this campaign. So I made my $15,000, and then now I'm back into the editing, and I got another coach to help me back into editing, and he's already hitting me with stuff, and I was writing this whole weekend. And I'm glad that, I'm not as far behind as I thought I was going to be. He didn't rip me apart, which, thank God, I got some good compliments in there. So I write until September, I guess the end of September, and then that gets packaged up, copied, copy edited, and then January, God willing, everything goes well, January, it
Do you
gets
have a title?
published.
Do you have, are you allowed to tell us, or
Yeah.
is it
My title,
classified?
my title is Bringing Ego to the Forefront. And then the subtitle, The First Step Towards Ego-Free Leadership. Might be working with the second thing a little bit, but the first one is mine. I'm going to stick with it. Bringing ego to the forefront, because the quicker we talk about ego, the quicker we can discuss that. And I can tell you, my door is open. Like I'm sure your door was open, like we discussed before the podcast started. And there's nothing better when I've had, a sergeant and an officer come in here and talk to me about, a mistake they made, and them use, hey, this was my ego. I did this because of my ego. I made this mistake because of my ego. For somebody like me, hearing that and then seeing the adjustment made and their behavior, there's nothing better than that. I mean, that tells me I'm doing something right. My influence is out there. They're listening, I feel like a teacher, maybe, elementary school teacher or high school teacher. I don't know. But yeah, its discussion is out there, and, the message is getting through. And this book is not for just cops. This is, because and I know this is corporate. My wife's a nurse. This is in hospitals, doctors, nursing, teachers, government. You know, ego is everywhere. So I made it
Well,
generic
yeah.
enough, so that it's covering all aspects of leadership and management.
Yeah, universal appeal. I mean, Stoicism is, something Ego is the Enemy was probably the first like modern book on Stoicism that I had read. But that's kind of become part of, and these are conversations I had with Daniel years ago, and I've told the story several times on the podcast previously, but you know, I think oftentimes people just kind of misunderstand the difference between mentoring and coaching and counseling and management, leadership, everything, they all kind of have their own paths. And I went through a program a few years before I retired that I wish, like, if I could go back, like, I would do this way earlier in my career. And as a leader, I would have, and I would have, I would have forced young leaders to go through this program. But it was Stephen Kotler and the Flow Research Collective, and the program was called Zero to Dangerous, and um, it was a 16-week program that I was able to do remotely. The one thing that I had to do as part of that program was I had to work with a coach, a professional coach, and I just like again, it was something that made me personally very uncomfortable. Like
Right.
I've been to staff and command, I've been to Harvard's, state and local leaders program. I'm just like I just don't know about this, like working with a coach. And there were 11 coaches to choose from. They're all PhD level coaches, just brilliant people. And one of them had a history working with FBI HRT, and no one else had any like real experience. They were all like working in the private sector in the corporate world. So I was like, all right, well, this guy might understand, what a cop's job is. And so, yeah, I dreaded that first 1 hour with him. But, within 5 minutes of that call, one of the things he said to me, and he was in New York City, and he was like, hey, look, he was like, just want to spend a few minutes kind of getting to chat, get to know you a little bit. But he's like, then let's get right down to business. He's like, I know you're a busy guy, and I'm a really busy guy. So I don't want to waste your time, but more importantly, I don't want you wasting my time. And I was like, well, Art, didn't I pay for this program? Like, but it just, but it was, as a cop, it just resonated with me. I'm like, all right, I can appreciate that.
Right.
And we got right into it. But I share this story because and I share it with leaders all the time now when I'm out teaching, because the that hour just was like, boom, it was gone. I didn't realize how much stuff I like had, like that I just needed to, just talk about. And so it was another 2 weeks before I had my next session. But one of the things I worked with him on was just what my morning routine was. Like, what do you do? And this is coming from someone who I feel like I'm highly disciplined. You know, I've worked out, I've trained, I've competed. I still compete even in masters divisions and like Spartan and High Rocks and CrossFit, stuff like that. So, um, it was really, really powerful working with a coach. And it was, one of the things, the big, and that's why I was so excited to do that work with Daniel and what he was building early on, because I'm like, this is something that I think would bring exponential value to the policing world, because we just don't do it. And usually it comes coaching in then policing comes in the form of discipline. It's after you've made a mistake, then like well, you get put on a performance improvement plan. You get forced to go through EAP or something along those lines, rather than being proactive and preemptive. So I mean, it's just a long way of me saying that I'm a firm believer in coaching. I do think stoicism. I've had the street stoic on the podcast in the past. We've talked about this. Like, since then I've read a lot of Seneca, I've read Marcus Aurelius and Meditations, and it's part of what I do in the morning. Um, what would you say, and I know we're closing in on time here, so I do a couple things. What would you say, the biggest benefit to coaching is for police officers at any level inside the organization?
Wow. So here, um, so I've brought coaching to 2 organizations. I'm probably the rare guy that I've had it in Chambersburg, and then I brought it with me here to North Charleston. So yeah, so in Chambersburg, I saw kind of immediately, and it was a little easier to buy in there, right? Um, I saw guys like almost immediately. I saw two detectives lose like 30 pounds, right? You know, and they had female, psychologists. They didn't have cop coaches, man, and then they started talking about their coaches, and then that spread, and then other guys started going to that coach. They started requesting their same coaches. So like, a third of my department had like the same 2 female coaches. And where I, with all my superpowers, right, where I could, mentor, coach myself, influence, inspire, where I could not get through to somebody, those coaches were getting through to people. I had a one woman, super sharp. I mean, just really, sharp, just stubborn. And there was a stubbornness, little bit of a wall, couldn't take criticism, you know. And then met a coach and uh, came. Yep, I recognize that in me, and I know that that's me, and I'm working on that, Chief. And that was huge to me. So I just started seeing, a different flavor. And one of the guys in there, I really didn't get along with, right? And it was rare because I kind of got along with all those guys. But there was one guy, just oil and water, it happens. You're not going to get along with everybody. After coaching, it changed. Something changed about him, the way he was, that I could sit down and have a pleasant conversation with him. I can have an in-depth conversation with him and not feel like it was like nails on a chalkboard. So I saw all this positivity and I saw all this really good stuff, and I saw morale shooting up and I saw, productivity shooting up. And I was like, okay, we're on something. And I felt like we were going to do it, but you don't know until you don't know, until
Right.
you pull it. So I bring it here to North Charleston, and now I got to really do some selling because this is a foreign concept here. We're the only department in South Carolina to have it. And so I get it here, and slowly but surely, drips and drabs, they're using coaches. And everybody that I talk to, they like it. A great, great, great interaction, great interaction, right? But then we had promotions coming up. And then all of a sudden, right, I hear that, there's a jump in how many coaches we're using, right? And then I see people that were at the bottom of the list. Now all of a sudden, they're at the top of the list, right? Because they invested in themselves. They invested their time in getting a coach and who helped them, um, work on their interview skills, work on themselves, get better. And then they could see, right, the results. They walked into those interviews with confidence that they didn't have before, right? And I saw that at the corporal rank, and I saw that at the lieutenant rank, and I saw that in between. And that kind of was like awesome. We're now showing that this is not just, it's not there, like you said, but this is a preemptive thing. This is for you to be proactive, just like you're proactive on the street, proactive in your career, and we're developing you, right? You use this as a tool to get better. And you want to become a better canine guy, find the canine guy that's the expert. You want to become a better drug guy, find the drug guy that's on there that's an expert. You want to learn time management, find the time management expert on there. And we've seen that. And the department has, gotten better. So one of the things I want to share with you that, I said I had some stats. So the first year that I'm here, we go through our accreditation, and the accreditation guy says to my internal affairs guy, he goes, what's up with this, man? What are you guys doing different? and it was our use of force, and our use of force was cut down by like 46%, right, over that year. And he goes, well, it's we got a new chief. But when we start looking at it, it was the coaching platform, right? Combined with, this new change in culture, combined with, some better training as far as the our defensive tactics or hand to hand stuff. So all this went together, to show. We also lowered our um, internal discipline. So slowly but surely, our internal discipline got better. We weren't we weren't writing up as many people because they got better, and our sergeants, they were looking at just as much body cam, even more body cam. They were on the street because they knew if they weren't doing that and we caught them, they were going to be demoted, right, or they were going to be in trouble. So they started taking their jobs, taking more ownership of their jobs. So the internal discipline, dropped by like 30%. And then our complaints dropped by about 20%, 26% or something like that. So here were year stats that we could go that were very different, especially the use of force, very different than the year before. And all that had to do with the spirit of development, right? And coaching, the platform, performance protocol platform, the spirit of, hey, I want to develop you. In between there, I invested money and started sending guys to command schools uh, at a younger, um, at a lower rank. Before, command schools were strictly for the chief level, and I started sending captains and lieutenants to command schools. Um, and then, even more of trying to accomplish what you said, trying to get these corporals. We started a sergeant school for the corporals to get them ready, and just hey, we're a different place, we have a different attitude, and that has that attitude has kind of been infused all around the department, and we're seeing some of that, and I'm very happy. I'm very proud of what you're doing. On top of that are our regular stats that everybody, our numbers, our crime numbers have gone down, but that doesn't concern me as much as those other numbers, our use of force, yes, our complaints, yes, and our internal discipline. Those numbers are way more important to me than crime.
Well,
And
the old saying is like, you have teams full of professional athletes, but there's still a coach, right? Yeah. Um, theoretically, you know, people could self-organize, right? But in the corporate world, the idea of not having a coach is strange. Like
right,
you're like I would say in most environments in the corporate world, at certain levels of the organization, you're required to work with a coach. It's not optional. It's
yeah,
like you go do it. And for some reason in policing, it's just like, well, why would I? You're like, I know how to do my job. I don't need a coach. And this is where people, I think, confuse the concept sometimes. It's really, sure, you have culturally competent coaches, people that have worked in law enforcement, but they're also trained in how to be coaches as well. So yeah, they understand what the job's like, and so you're not going to be able to jump on a call and just commiserate or bitch to somebody and pull any wool over their eyes because they know they've been there, they've done that.
right,
And I mean, not that everyone looks to do that, but it's really this kind of idea that, like, I'll just say, for example, um, I love to golf too, and in my retirement, I'm trying to play more golf, but I keep getting myself so busy that I haven't been able to play. But even as someone who's played golf for over 40 years, if I know if I want to get better, I've got to have somebody look at my swing. I've got to have somebody watch. I've got to have somebody give me feedback. And no matter who we are, where we are in life, we're all on a journey someplace, going somewhere, and there's always someone that can help us along the way. You just have to be willing to ask. And and that can be a hard thing for cops is asking for help, just like you were talking about earlier with your book. Like sometimes you got to ask for it, and sometimes, yeah, you got to pay for it,
Yeah.
and that's okay too.
One thing that happened this year, I hit something that I never encountered before, right? Uh, an extraordinary amount of resistance from someplace that I never dealt with before. It's a brand new thing for me. And you know, I reached out to the recruiter who helped with the process here, and she put me in contact with a chief from a department, larger size department, but one that she had worked with. So this is the first time in a long time, right? And probably that I can remember that I'm asking for help. I'm looking for that knowledge outside of my realm because, hey, I know it all, right? And just talking to this guy who has now become a good friend, right? Helped me tremendously process what the hell I was going through because I'd never been through this, And while it was an official coaching, type session, I had to humble myself and say, I need help. And that guy gave me some great advice. Our careers were incredibly similar. It was ridiculous how similar our careers were. And he went through something very similar to me, gave me some great advice. I filled him, I would keep on calling him every now and then to fill him in on the updates. And then, a couple months ago, he called me to run something by me, and I gave him some advice, because he needed that objective look at something, and I was glad that I could give back, But you're right, and look, I'm sure you either love Chiefs or you hate Chiefs, right? We're either these guys that kind of understand, or we're these Napoleonic figures that just run our jurisdictions, like old town sheriffs or despots, and it's hard. It's hard dealing with them. I know how it was in many places where everybody was just a little king in their own little area. Down here, I'm glad to say that the attitude is different, and the sheriffs and chiefs around here accepted me with open arms and have been very helpful in helping me acclimate down here and have been very supportive. So that's been different um, than Pennsylvania. Let's put it that way. Or where
Yeah,
I came from in
it is
Pennsylvania.
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah,
18,000 police departments, right? And in America, and every one of them is different.
yeah,
No two agencies are the same. Um, and but there are commonalities, and there are things that we can all learn from each other. And there's a lot of room for sharing. Certainly a lot of room for giving back. But well, listen, I knew this was going to happen. I have a tendency to go long on these things, and we're already heading that way. So I'm not going to ask any more questions, but I do want to give you the opportunity. Is there anything I didn't ask you, or is there anything else you want to share before we get to how can people get in touch with you, and if they want to learn more about your book and and your writing and stuff that you're working on?
sure. I'm on LinkedIn, so Ron Camacho. You can find me there. Facebook. The book has its own website, so it's bringing ego to the forefront.com. Pretty soon, I'll have my own website at roncamacho.com. It's not built yet, and yeah, so those are the easiest ways to contact me. And yeah, no, I appreciate what you're doing, getting the message out. God bless you for having the time and patience to do this work, um, and just get this message out. So
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. A lot more I wanted to get to, but we didn't get there. Maybe next time. But one thing for sure, next time I make it down to South Carolina, we're gonna have to hook up because I love that area. I love the whole Charleston, North Charleston area. Yeah, I need I don't know what the Windjammer looks like these days, but you've been down, have you been down to the Isle of Palms lately?
Yeah, the Windjammer is where we do our polar plunge, which is funny because you're doing the polar plunge in January, February. It's 50 degrees. The water's 50 degrees. Very different than the Susquehanna River in Pennsylvania, where it's like the frozen. The water
Yeah.
temperature is like 32 or something like that.
A
So
little different than me going out on my patio here doing a nice plunge on my back patio in the
yeah.
dead of winter when it's I have to put a de-icer in my tank so it doesn't freeze, turn into a
Oh,
big solid block of ice.
yeah.
Uh,
I love the area. I love South Carolina. I love the people here have been very kind and accepting of me, and can't be the weather. And hey, I got a harbor unit, man. Come down, and we'll go on the harbor, man, to give you a tour of the Charleston, North Charleston, low country area via the harbor unit, man. So
Awesome, awesome. I love it. Well, Ron Camacho, Chief Ron Camacho, Dr. Ron Camacho, author Ron Camacho, uh, paratrooper Ron Camacho. That was probably the most fun you had. Uh, but
yeah,
I really do appreciate you spending some of your valuable time with us. Hit him up on LinkedIn. Buy his book when it's available in January, and maybe once the book comes out, I get a chance to read it. Then we'll jump on another conversation and do this again. So thanks again. I really really appreciate you being here.
thank you, Pat. I appreciate you, man. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Until the next episode, we'll be 1042.